Saludos a todos, and thank you for joining us for Evening Conversations. My name is Mariana Garcia, and I'm a museum educator at Connecticut's Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all today to today's virtual program, Extra Extra, a conversation on Latino journalism. This event is sponsored in partnership with El Instituto, UConn's Institute of Latina, Caribbean, and Latin American Studies at the University of Connecticut. El Instituto is a multidisciplinary research and teaching institute that advances scholarship, creative endeavors, undergraduate and graduate instruction, and academic advising across multiple disciplines in the fields of Latino and Latin American studies. Its mission is to advance knowledge about the lives of Latino people in Connecticut, nationwide, and around the world, as well as provide support for research on Caribbean and Latin American related topics to UConn students and faculty. And we are very happy to continue our partnership with El Instituto again. And here at the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House, our goal is to connect history and civics and encourage everybody to have an active participation in state government. And of course, one of the key foundations for civic engagement is to be well-informed citizens. Both the government and the public rely on journalists to remain connected to each other. And our state has a huge and diverse Latino population. And that is why this Hispanic Heritage Month, we really want to spotlight the work being done and challenges faced by Latino journalists and news media here in Connecticut, and why it is so important to support Latino journalism. During today's program, please feel free to put your questions in the comments section, and we will get to them throughout the program. But we have a wonderful panel of speakers with us today, both from the field of journalism and from local government. But first, please allow me to introduce our moderator for today's evening, who will be introducing your speakers. Scott Wallace is an award-winning journalist and associate professor of journalism at the University of Connecticut. He has devoted much of his career to coverage of Latin American issues and events. Based in Central America throughout the 1980s, he covered conflicts in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala for CBS News, The Guardian, and Newsweek. More recently, he has been reporting on the environment and indigenous peoples in the Amazon rainforest for National Geographic and other publications. So, Scott, thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Very kind introduction. I appreciate that very much. And I'm very honored to be here tonight to bring this, to moderate this panel. It is a terrific group of journalists and officials that we have with us tonight. I'm going to just briefly give you a sketch of who they are, and then we'll get into the discussion. We have with us Maricarmen Cajahuaringa, who's a journalist, social worker, and creative thinker who lives here in Connecticut. She's founder of the digital news platform, Boceto Media. She was born in Peru, but has lived half of her life now here in the United States. Her work ranges from newspaper and digital platforms to television, and her passion topics are social justice and local politics. She's appeared on many panels talking about issues of diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. She's focused on making a positive impact here in Connecticut, using the power of the digital age to engage and build communities by connecting them to achieve their goals. We also have with us Hugo Balta, who's an award-winning broadcast and digital media news executive. He's been directing growth and innovation in several divisions and businesses in the US and in Latin America. He's the owner and publisher of Latino News Network, which embraces 5 local news and information websites with a statewide community editorial focus that includes ctlatinonews.com here in Connecticut. He's been inducted into the Hall of Fame of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, where he was twice president. And he founded the nonprofit Abuelita, the Hortensia Zavala Foundation, in honor of his late grandmother, Hortensia, and that provides scholarships for students studying journalism. The foundation expanded its support of young journalists by sponsoring a journalism camp starting last year in 2020 that covers race, ethnicity, and culture. Balta's nearly 30 years of experience include leadership roles with news networks that include PBS, NBC, ABC, CBS, Telemundo, and ESPN. We have with us as well Brenda León, who is a core member of Report for America, which is a national service program that places journalists in local newsrooms. She covers the Latino, Latina, Latinx community here in Connecticut with an emphasis on disparities, wealth-based disparities in health, education, and criminal justice. She earned a master's degree in the Spanish language journalism program at the City University of New York. She has also studied multimedia journalism with a concentration in political science while she was there. And she was also a presenter at WWRL La Invasora, 1600 AM. Her work has been published in the Gothamist, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, El Deadline, and Mount Haven Herald. Lastly, we have with us, but certainly not least, Werner Oyanadel, who's the Latin and Community and Puerto Rican Policy Director overseeing the Latino and Puerto Rican Policy Division for the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity for the Connecticut General Assembly. He provides liaison services and duties with state officials, policymakers, and community influencers from around legislative initiatives that seek to enhance meaningful, equitable opportunities for Latino and Puerto Rican residents in the state of Connecticut. He holds a bachelor's in political science and with a concentration in public administration and a minor in philosophy. He's been named he's won numerous awards and has been named most influential Latinos in Connecticut by the Latinos United for Professional Excellence organization. And he's also been recognized by the Identidad Latina Multimedia as one of the 50 most prominent Latinos in the state of Connecticut. And I am going to turn the floor over, if you will, the floor to him right now to get us started with a little bit of overview of the situation here in Connecticut. So with that, it's my pleasure to give you Werner to start. I think you're muted.
Good evening, Scott. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. I am going to share my screen so I can show my presentation. Please let me know when that it's being displayed. So my name is Werner Oyanadel. I work for the commission, as was indicated by Scott. The commission is a nonpartisan agency within the legislative branch of government in the state of Connecticut. Our staff works to eliminate disparities by identifying opportunities, building connections, and promoting equity. Most importantly, we serve the legislature and the people of the state by promoting best practices and driving sound public policy via data-driven research and cross-cultural approach to policy innovation. So we recently received the data from the latest census that was conducted in the United States. The data comes from it's going to be served for redistricting purposes, but it shared a number of population data that we wanted to see now for the past 10 years to see the new data. Basically, it says the Latino population grew from 50 million in the last decade to 62 million in 2020. Latinos comprise nearly 1 of every 5 of our nation's residents. which is 18.7%, up from 16% in 2010. Latinos continue to be the nation's second largest population group, and our nation must address issues that affect the Latino community to thrive and prosper based on that data. The Latino population, just to go more in depth, the Latino population growth between 2010 and 2020 outpaced the nation's growth by 23% in comparison to a 7% growth. The Latino population increase accounted for over half of the nation's overall growth. Now let's talk about the Latino population, because the data revealed that there is a sizable Latino youth population in the country under the age of 18, which is 18.8 million Latino youth. Slightly more than 1 in every 4 youth in the country was Latino, while the total youth population declined by 1.4% between 2010 and 2020. The Latino youth population increased by 9.5%. Let me say that again. The Latino youth population increased while the regular or the general population of youth declined by 1.4%. Now, this slide is very busy, but I think it really wants to show a number of important facts. 86% of Hispanics in the country are legal residents in the United States. Immigration reform is a hot topic for Latinos, but the majority of Latinos are U.S. citizens. 60% of experience discrimination. 4 out of 5 young Latinos say their family and friends have been targets of discrimination. And this is an important fact. I'm not going to mention all the facts that are in this slide, but I'm going to highlight a few to save time. In the media, 42% of Hispanics say that the media depicts them negatively. And I will point out from this graph that $1.7 trillion is the Hispanic buying power. I think that is very interesting highlights that I want to point out, because I think it's going to serve for a deeper and rich conversation this evening. The share of Latinos in the U.S. who speak English proficiently is growing. That's very significant given the conversation that we're having tonight. And so in regards to equity, based on the data of the population growth, for me that I work in the legislative branch of government, we look to work on policies affecting youth, such as reducing poverty, improving access to healthcare, and providing high-quality public education. Those issues must be taken into account the needs of these Latino families. And finally, but not least, we need to have a robust investment in Latino children, because today's investments can help ensure a strong, prosperous nation tomorrow. The Latino population in Connecticut reached 623,000 people. This is makes up the second largest population, just like I mentioned at the national level. It grew significantly. But also we saw a significant increase of people that identified with more than two races, increased by, as you can see in that graphic, 131%. Demographers and sociologists attribute the trend to several factors, including an increase in multiracial families and greater freedom to choose one's identity. But again, what I mentioned in the past decade, the Latino population in Connecticut grew 30%, while the white population in Connecticut decreased by 10%. Now, that 600,000 amount of people indicate that we are 17% of the overall population in Connecticut. I have been here in Connecticut for a long time, back when we only represented about 4%. 32 million are eligible voters in the United States, and every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 years old in the United States. So we have a lot of progress to work on. We're working at the Capitol on racial and ethnic impact statements, and a number of other issues such as suspensions and expulsions, the disparate impact of COVID-19 in the Latino community, obviously at the federal level, comprehensive immigration reform, and at the Connecticut level, also issues of minority teacher and recruitment, and issues dealing with gun violence and prevention. Since we are in Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm highlighting some facts about the community. Some are very Very important, 8 out of 10 new businesses are started by Latinos. Latinas create small businesses 6 times faster than any other group in the US. And since we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, I wanted to indicate that in 2017, Ilia Calderon became the first Afro-Latina to anchor a major news desk in the United States. And very important to know is that by 2050, 1/4 of the population will be Hispanic. So we have a lot to celebrate during this Hispanic Heritage celebration. I have a few seconds in my presentation. I want to just highlight the fact that we have the major news stations here in the state, Univision and Telemundo. They divide in Connecticut the work that they do in Boston and New York, so we don't get so much of the direct attention in Connecticut, but they have a significant viewership in the United States. Telemundo does as well, almost hovering about 1 million. And these are the growing and local news media that we have in the state. Some is newspaper-based radio stations, and we have a number of other Latino Hispanic agencies are revolutionizing their work and evolving in the media that it's social media here in the state as well. Finally, to conclude my presentation, I wanted to show you my future considerations that I have. We have a Hispanic American media that it's going to be competing with social influencers. Social influencers have millions of followers, and they don't sometimes follow the same journalistic principles that the regular media conducts. And so as we move forward, I think we have to have a conversation about the influence of social influencers in the Hispanic media. And my final thoughts around this is again, the question soon will be how the Latino or the mainstream media in general will be able to compete against social media influencers as they amass multi-million followers and use their platforms to share information without needing to be impartial, factual, or follow any fundamental journalistic principles. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Lots of things to think about there and to help us kick off this panel tonight. I'd like to now turn it over to some of the other panelists who will have 5 minutes to shape the discussion and around the things that they would like to also touch on tonight. And in that, I think I would like to turn first to Maricarmen Cajahuaringa, who will share some thoughts with us right now. Maricar.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. It's really an honor for me to be part of this team and speaking about the issues that we as Latino journalists face anywhere we go to do our job. So to add for the explanation that Werner just did, and I really speaks up to a lot of the things that I'm going to add, and the things that I have encountered as a Latino journalist. And one of the things is that I think that we as Hispanics face lots of discrimination. And I am speaking for my personal experience. I have been denied misinformation. And this has happened from businesses to community and institutions. It didn't really matter if I was working for a small media company, for my own company, or for a big company. I have the moments when I have faced discrimination and I was in the position of I couldn't do my job as if I was a fluent or a United States born citizen. This also have led a lot of people to not taking my work serious because I have an accent or because I am a Latina woman. And that is the belief also that I cannot do my job because I have an accent. And as a MMJ reporter, and which is what I have basically done since at the beginning of my career, I work solo, and
in the field, many times I have been asked if I work with a photographer. And a lot of times that it have made me feel that I cannot do my job because one, I'm a woman, and because two, I'm a Latina woman. To be validated, I need to have a male presence to really do the job that I was sent to do. And this also opens a topic to a lot of other colleagues, women colleagues out there, Latina journalists, that face also every single day. And it's that research studies done in 2020, right after George Floyd, have proven that Latina journalists earn on average 37% less than their white male peers. So this is a topic that, as a Latina journalist and other journalists, female journalists that are in this field, also we face only because of our gender. And this, like, again, it has to do a lot with, I would say it is a chain reaction of what Werner gave in detail prior to my presentation right now. Another topic that I also think that is important is how we can break that stigma that the mainstream media has or portrays on the Latino community, on their stories and images. And for instance, we have heard a lot of negativity around immigrants, and that has been it has come from our authorities. In many ways, I'm talking about specifically the prior administration, whether you are a documented immigrant or a documented immigrant. For some groups, it doesn't really matter because you are an immigrant. And specifically, that happens when you come from Hispanic countries. That's what I mainly have seen, that a lot of people that come from Latino countries have been discriminated because of their skin color, because how the way they look, or their accent, if they attempt to learn or speak in English. This also applied to the images that we see in our daily news, in our mainstream media, how we portray how we see crime, which is the main news that we see every single day, and who perpetrates them. And sadly, this is done by poor community members of their communities. That is a cycle of just discrimination, the result of poverty and lack of education, that leads a lot of people in these minority communities to commit acts that are not positive for our communities and our developments in this in country. And also stereotyping our communities, saying that Latinos are thugs, rapists, drug dealers, and so on. So it's a lot of negativity that we see, and that we or I think it should be changed. So how can we change that? How can we come together to make a change as Latino media? I was thinking about this for a long time, and I had so many ideas about this topic. And I think that as Hispanic media, we have to come together and sit and talk about these issues to really make a point to different levels for the leaders that lead this state specifically. We have to see ourselves and let aside the business interests or privileges that specific media or Hispanic media outlets already have. And of course, for the great job that they're doing, but at the end, we're all in the same box. No matter if you're a big, medium, or a small media business, we have to hold people accountable. And let's not compete against each other, but let's hold hands. We need to make a change for the reporters or our reporters, or if we are solo, so that we can really protect ourselves against the struggles that we see out there. Because at the end, we are the ones that put the face out there. And let's not be a copycat of the mainstream media. I personally like to do impactful and meaningful stories that strengthen our communities. So if I personally, I'm going to be doing the same type of news that other people do, then I'm not trying to make any change. I'm just copycat of what is already there. So I think that we can make a change. We have to sit together. We have to talk, all of us, and really make these changes possible for the future of new Latino journalists. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maricarmen. Some very urgent messages there that we'll be taking up in the course of the evening. Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to introduce now Hugo Balta. Please welcome Mr. Balta, who's joining us from Chicago.
Thank you very much, Scott. Yes, I'm in Chicago. I recently moved here, but I've lived in central Connecticut for about 10 years. I'm originally from the Northeast, and as mentioned, I'm the owner and publisher of the Latino News Network. Really great insights from both Maricarmen, personal stories from Maricarmen, and certainly Werner. I mean, I commend you. That's a lot to get through in about 5 or so minutes, but really very impactful. To add to what our first two guests talked about, I think I can talk a little bit more about the Latino News Network and really that focus, right? Because as you've seen from the guest speakers and even in Werner's presentation, this is a very diverse group. And he mentioned Univision and Telemundo as as the two largest networks that are focused on covering Hispanic Latinos in New England and certainly in the state of Connecticut. But one of the things that's missing is English language media. Of the more than 60 million U.S. Hispanic Latinos, as Werner mentioned, the census tells us they're U.S. born, and like myself, a second generation Peruvian American, Hispanic Latino, and other generations, English is our first language. But mainstream media historically continues to ignore us, and that's largely because of the underrepresentation of Hispanic Latinos in newsrooms, regardless of the platform. So the stories that are being produced about Hispanic Latinos are usually not by Hispanic Latinos, creating a one-dimensional narrative about who and what this community is. CTLatinoNews.com and certainly the Latino News Network, of which we oversee 5 independent news and information, statewide coverage, Hispanic Latino editorial focus sites. Our main focus is to elevate the visibility and voices of Hispanic Latinos in English language in order to chip away at some of those tired stereotypes about this community, because of course this community is a sizable group of them are immigrant born. A large portion of that immigrant community was the first line workers that kept our state and our country operating in a most unprecedented time with COVID-19. But there are also second, third, fourth generation Hispanic Latinos that are educators, that are in government, that are in healthcare, that are practicing the law. And these are the faces and voices that often are not seen in English language media. Our mission is really built on 3 pillars. One is to, again, elevate the voices and visibility of Hispanic Latinos in the state of Connecticut. It is also to, as Maricarmen said, we need to collaborate. So it's about amplifying the work of Hispanic Latinos and others in this space. And so we have a lot of partnerships, for example, with CT Mirror, CT News Junkie in the state of Connecticut, CT Health Investigation, or the CT Investigation Health Group. It's important for us to collaborate in working in this space. Third, it's about providing experiences and mentoring to aspiring journalists in order for them to get the opportunities that Maricarmen talked about that she's not getting, for being a woman, for being an immigrant Latina, for having an accent. It is very important for me as a twice president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists to work with young journalists and really journalists on all different levels in providing them the mentoring and experience that they need in order to succeed, in order to best serve not only the Hispanic Latino community, but by building bridges with all communities, inspire conversations that promote better understanding.
Thank you very much. That's very excellent. And we'll have ample opportunity to discuss these things shortly. Before we do, let's get to our last panelist, Brenda León, and looking forward to hearing from her. Go ahead, Brenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited, and I think to piggyback off of what my colleagues all just mentioned, this year has been a challenge for everyone, and I think that as a emerging reporter, this is my first year here in Connecticut. I am originally from New York City, born and raised in New York. I am a first-generation Mexican American, and I definitely concur with what Maricarmen was mentioning as well about the challenges of finding the right spaces for us to be able to hone our craft and be able to tell the stories behind those numbers that my colleague Werner was showing us, right? Stories that have come up over this past year that I've been here in Connecticut covering the Latino community in Greater Hartford have been about hardships and have been about the resourcefulness within the Latino community. And I think that there's a big misconception about the topics that the Latino community cares about, being one and first most immigration. And I think that has changed with the growth of the population here in the US, right? People want to find out how to send their children to better schools, how to access quality healthcare, how to be able to take advantage of the laws that protect labor rights, as well as learning about voting rights. And I think that we're coming up in a year where we're thinking about our coverage. And one of the topics that I would like to talk about is how do we tell the stories about the Latino community and for the Latino community. And I think that in my role as a reporter at Connecticut Public Radio is a conversation that I consistently have with my editors. And it's been a great opportunity for me to be able to think more deeply about how we are reaching audiences that might not be familiar with the more traditional mediums that have been around for decades, right? I think that we are coming into a point where we have to have these conversations that not only push forward, as Hugo mentioned, one-dimensional narratives, but a holistic one that really takes into consideration the Latino experience that, is not only one that's rooted here in the US, but also in Latin America and in their countries that, people leave behind to come and find better opportunities. And I think that this year has, finding those stories has been a privilege and a great joy as well to be able to tell stories. I covered families who were experiencing hardships during the pandemic because of a lack of health insurance. I've met with families, or I've followed people who created food pantries from their homes. And I also had the privilege to travel to Puerto Rico. There's a large Puerto Rican community here in Connecticut, and we are rooted between two places often and consistently. So I think that for us to be able to not only throw statistics and be able to look at them, but really think about them more deeply in terms of how people are personally impacted by these troubling times, both at a local level and at a national level. And I'm very happy to be here and very, very excited to start this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very interesting. So maybe we could start by, I'd be interested to know what you think could be done most immediately to improve the coverage of Latino community here in Connecticut, but in terms and discrimination. I would start with Werner, if you have any thoughts about it.
Scott, I think you, when you were asking the question, you were We didn't really hear the question clearly. Could you repeat that question, Scott?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I was just wondering, what can we do to shift the ground most immediately, do you think, in terms of improving the coverage and the general population's understanding, perhaps, and getting past some of these barriers that some of you have mentioned in terms of, discrimination and negative stereotypes?
My perspective probably would be from a non-journalist. My concern is about how do we have an independent media where the local media, it needs the resources from government or from public entities to make their businesses be able to be competitive and be able to make a profit and be able to be informative. Um, I think things are changing significantly, as I mentioned in my presentation. The fact of how the new platforms in social media are beginning to use the new systems on computers to get audiences around the world and be able to market their information in different ways than the way that has been done by regular journalists locally. So I think the challenge will be how these changes are going to occur. I love to hear the feedback from our journalists and media experts here to see how that is going to be evolved as well.
Thank you very much. Maybe I could ask a similar question to Hugo Balta. What do you think, and I'd like to hear from others about this too, is there a place for non-Hispanic, Anglo, if you will, or non-Hispanic reporters to report on the affairs of the Latino community, and what could be done to assure that their coverage is a little bit broader, more understanding, or should the communities, should it just be Latino, Latina, Latinx journalists who are covering the communities?
I really appreciate that question, because I think one of the things about having events like this is a safe space, right? We're not here to call each other out or to just, wag our index finger. We have to talk about what are the solutions. Identifying the problems is easy. Coming up with the solutions, that's what's difficult. And I think, to your point, none of us are saying that a non-Hispanic, non-Latino journalist can do a good job about telling a story about the Hispanic Latino community. Of course not. I think any good journalist can tell a good story, regardless of whether or not they have a direct, they're members of the community that they're covering, or their background, whether it be race, their sexual orientation, gender, what have you. But with that said, what we do have to do is create spaces for collaboration. And so, for example, with the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, in my last year as president, we launched a cultural competence guideline that I'm more than happy to help. And this was really to serve all newsrooms, because we understood there's no magic wand that from one day to the other, all of a sudden you're going to have representation that's equitable. So we have to work with all journalists, and so that they have moments of pause and a guide as they're covering, in this particular case, Hispanic Latinos. So there are many resources at the hand of all journalists that are often not used. NAHJ, like other organizations representing the Black community, the LGBTQ community, the Asian American community, and so on, are at the ready to help newsrooms and do better in being fair and accurate in their reporting. That is something that I think is a tool, an underused tool, that really could help all newsrooms avoid some of the figurative potholes that often happen when they're covering, whether it be Hispanic Latinos or other marginalized communities.
Very interesting response. Thank you very much for that. And Brenda, maybe I could turn to you on this. What is it like for you as a Latina journalist covering the Hispanic community, but doing it in English for, a more traditional mainstream audience here in the United States like NPR?
Well, I would say that it's been a learning experience. This past year, these same stories, I've been able to really take a step back and have this conversation very honestly with my editor. How do we bridge both the coverage that we do on a daily basis that speaks about the Latino community, and how do we put our product so that non-traditional audiences follow our work? And in my daily work, I took to social media to do that, right? I was able to produce some content and produce news headlines all in Spanish and promote them on social media. And I think that, you know, it's about getting very creative in the way that we put out our stories. But it's also been a learning experience for both my editor and I, right? I come with story ideas, and we really take a step back and think about how we're going to frame this in a way that is a two-way street, right? And I think that that cultural competency that Hugo mentions as well is necessary for us to be able to not just depend on Latino journalists to tell Latino stories, right? Because I want to be in a newsroom where we can talk about the consistent intersections of people's livelihoods, right? And I think that is shifting, and those conversations are just really sincere and open conversations that need to happen in a place of trust. Because I think that if we take a moment to reflect, we're also repairing these relationships that traditional outlets have had with communities that they don't necessarily always cover. And I think that road to repairing the trust and building is the starting point.
Excellent. Thank you. Maricarmen, I'm just wondering, have you experienced any kind of, you know, since the new administration came into office here, you did mention, and I think we all will agree that the previous administration went a long way toward maybe deepening some of the suspicions, if you will, of the immigrant communities here in the United States. Have you noticed, is this a lingering effect that is now continuing on into this administration? Do you notice anything, any shift in attitudes among people in general, or do you feel like things are just kind of stuck in a negative space?
I think things are changing now a little bit because we have this new administration that is trying to be more inclusive. But we're still dragging those opinions, the stigmas, and really the oppression that we've seen in the last 4 years. I think there's a lot of work to do. And we're in Connecticut. I think we're doing a pretty good job because we as Hispanic journalists are trying to break those stigmas, but there's still a lot of work to do here in Connecticut. And that comes from so many levels. We still need to give the opportunities to the people here in this state to really embrace the diversity that we have and tell our stories. And like Hugo and Brenda said, not necessarily have to be a Latino journalist that tells them, but as long as, of course, we are Latinos and we would like to see a Latino, someone that we can relate as well, right? That says our stories. But anyone in reality that is willing to learn, educate, and be part of our community is always welcome. Experiences, I guess, I'm not the only person that I experience this type of situations in my career. There's so many journalists out there that experience, and we have conversations about this type of topics. So this is something that is still ingrained in the culture of the United States, but thankfully we are seeing steps that really want to make these changes.
Excellent. And would you say organizations like the National Association of Hispanic Journalists that Hugo himself has been president of, is that a place where journalists such as yourself can go to get support support to discuss these issues and figure out, how to deal with some of these issues?
Of course, we are a community of Latino journalists that talk about these issues. It's not only discrimination, but also how we feel in our newsrooms, how we feel about mental health, how we feel about our communities or diverse communities out there, the topics that we want to talk in our stories. I mean, so many conversations start not only in the National Association, but in many different groups and many other journalists that have started their own groups on social media, and that can correlate with the situation that we all been through. Whether you are a new journalist or whether you are an experienced journalist, it doesn't matter, because at some point, all of us have experienced some type of situation that made us feel that either we are stupid or we cannot do it, or we've been judged, or we need some type of validation to say, yes, I am a journalist and I want to do my job. So please open that door for me.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Mhm.
Could I remind the audience that to please post your questions in the comments section here, and we'll get to those as soon as you start sending some of those in. In the meantime, what does it mean, as Werner showed us very eloquently, what does it mean that we are, this country is now, that the Latino community, the Hispanic population, is growing at such a large, a quick pace compared to the rest of the population? How do you see that affecting your work as journalists going forward, covering the Latino community here in Connecticut and elsewhere in the country? Brenda, could you answer that?
I think we're just in demand, and it's exciting, and I think that it's also an opportunity to create not only diverse newsrooms, but also newsrooms that really center on being able to promote and form journalists to cover diverse communities as well. And I think that is very important to take into account when we also think about, the stories that we need to provide coverage. At the core of that is the fact that the Latino community faces hardships within health disparities. We saw that all throughout the pandemic. I mean, I moved from New York City, where the epicenter of the pandemic was happening, to Hartford, and it wasn't very quick after. I realized that a lot of the concentrated poverty that exists in pockets of New York City are the same pockets of poverty that are very prevalent here in Connecticut as well. And I think that being able to understand those nuances is very important, and also being able to understand that the Latino community in and of itself is very, very, very diverse. Like I mentioned before, I grew up in New York City in a diverse Latino community, and we need to really take into account that people who come from Mexico might have a different experience than people from Colombia, or people who have left Puerto Rico in the span of the last decade might have a very different experience as to someone who immigrated through the border and has lived undocumented. So I think that these are very important conversations to continue to hold, and very important stories to report on. I think that being able to tell our stories from a frame that also takes into account not only the diversity within the Latino community, but also the class disparities, and also the racial differences as well, and the racial tension that exists even within the Latino community. And I think that that's very important, and for us to be able to frame our coverage while taking into account all of these different topics is extremely important.
Yeah, very interesting. And Hugo, could I ask you if you, where do you think that the coverage of the Latino community could be, where is it most lacking as far as you're concerned right now, and where should we be looking to bolster the coverage?
I think the it's all about inclusion. You know, it's often when we see Hispanics, Latino penetrate English language mainstream media, it's always because there's a story that's specific to that community. Most recently, we saw that with the census and the census numbers, and certainly last year with the general election, the Latino vote, as if this group is monolithic and all Latinos vote the same. I think it's really strange for anyone to walk down New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, New London, really anywhere in Connecticut, and not come across Hispanic Latinos, whether they're their neighbors, whether they are working at the grocery stores, at the restaurants, at the bank, at the hospitals, and then they be practically invisible in English language media, regardless of the platform, but certainly beginning with television. So I think it's really about the integration of those voices. If you're only talking to Latinos, whether as experts to begin with, about just Latino topics, then you're really not understanding the community itself and the impact that this community is saying to Werner's presentation in all facets of our society, from government to economic development to education to healthcare and so on. So it's really about integrating their voices to topics that are not necessarily just about Latino. This panel itself, as much as I'm a big supporter of, this conversation should be had 52 weeks out of the year and not just in the 4 weeks of the Hispanic Heritage Month. I think it's great to have a month that heightens the accomplishments, the challenges, and the opportunities of the Hispanic Latino community. And I could say the same thing for Black History Month, for LGBTQ Pride Month. But we have to have these conversations and integrate them with others 52 weeks out of the year.
Thank you. Amen. And what about, so we're as educators, which some of us are, as I am at least, at the University of Connecticut, where could we be improving to move this conversation forward, to move the coverage forward? Are we somehow failing in terms of training more Latino journalists? Are we failing in terms of rectifying some of these stereotypes and negative images? Where in the educational process do you all think we stand right now, and where could we improve? At the University of Connecticut or anywhere else in the state for that matter? Maybe I'd ask Werner this with all of his command of facts and figures. And do you have any thoughts about that, Werner?
Yeah, Scott, actually, that's a fascinating question, because going back to your last question about what we can expect now that the population is growing at this speed, right? For one, the Pew Research Center reported that 77% of newsroom employees in the United States were white. So working on diversifying the newsrooms to reflect the people of the country, I think would be a great start, right? In my presentation, I mentioned that in just 2017, Ilia Calderon became the first Afro-Latina to anchor a major news desk in the United States. That's incredible that we can still say that in the 21st century. As a matter of fact, if we even think of all the recognized names of national Latino journalists, I can think of a few that I can count with my hands. Maria Hinojosa, Jorge Ramos, Soledad O'Brien, Jose Diaz Balart, Maria Elena Salinas, Natalie Morales, Maria Antonieta Collins, and maybe a few more are probably the ones that we have to gain trust in our community. We recognize those names, but given the explosion of our population in terms of numbers, I think that we would love to see more of those names. But from a college and from a university perspective, I would love the journalist school to work on enforcing the fundamentals of the profession, because we need to make sure that our journalists are and remain independent, that they work and improve and under impartiality. There are some statistics that show that currently journalism, people don't trust it. They don't trust the media, if you will. But I think that there is a lot more that I guess we could do at the school level to make sure that that we work on those basics and those fundamentals, so that we can have a stronger profession. Now, this is not just about Latino journalism. This is about all journalists as a society as a whole. But hopefully that answers a little bit of your question.
I'd like to jump in for a second.
Go ahead, please.
Because I think there's one important note as far as education, and I think it's the importance of teaching, whether it's journalism students or communications students, the importance of the difference between objectivity and transparency. Objectivity is often taught as a means to be impartial. There's two sides to a story, but it also exorcises the journalist from the story itself. Look, I do not check my Hispanidad, my Latino-ness, my heterosexualness. I'm 51 years old, a parent of two teenagers, having grown up in the Northeast. I don't check that at the door when I go into work as a journalist. It's by understanding my biases, my prejudices, that I can then surround myself with people who are not like me, including the things that are not readily seen, like education, interests, experience, that I can work towards being fair and accurate in my reporting. And that's really important, because transparency builds trust with the audience. Objectivity distance the journalist from the audience. And what we've seen in the last four years, or previously with Donald Trump, this incessant attack of journalists as the enemies of the state, in continuously saying fake news, it's feeding off of this existing rift of the elitist journalists, this top-down approach that we are more educated than you, that we know better than you the news that you need to know. What independent journalists are adopting is this bottom-up approach, that we're listening to what matters most to you, that we're being inclusive in the editorial process, from the pitching stories to deciding what stories are covered, the focus of the stories, and the voices to tell those stories. We're being inclusive of you in that process. We still have the filters, but you're part of that process. And transparency is what's building trust between the public and the media. But that's only happening, or I should say, only happening independent journalism outlets. Legacy media is still trying to produce news the way has been done for 50, 60, 70 years.
With that objective paradigm that you mentioned, the so-called objectivity. Yes, and
Scott,
yeah.
Scott, I wanted to point out that I agree with Hugo 100%. I think it was Dan Rather back in 2016 that said at a public event that journalists need a spine transplant, and I think it goes to the point of saying that when journalists see somebody, specifically in politics, saying a lie, it needs to be called a lie. We want our journalists to be objective, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we just don't let politicians or people in the public arena saying things that are not true, and that journalists are not or are afraid, if you will, of saying something so abrupt to somebody that they're interviewing, because they're afraid that they will never be invited, or that they're going to be kicked out of a press conference, as Jorge Ramos was incorrectly kicked out of a press conference. So yeah, we need to make sure that our journalists are objective, but also we need to make sure that they are making our elected officials accountable for for the positions that they have in public service.
Thank you very much. Could I remind the audience to please put your questions in the comments section, just to the comments box to the right of the screen here tonight. And I do have a question from Sam Martinez from El Instituto at UConn, who mentions the Trump years brought new meaning and intensity to debates about journalistic objectivity. Following up on what we've just said, do journalists have roles to play in helping the public become more critical consumers of news media and social media? And now, whoever would like to take that first, go ahead. Do you have any thoughts about that, Maricarmen?
Of course, with the previous administration, we've seen plenty of what it has been named as fake news, not only coming from social media, but from mainstream media. And we all know where this came from. So I believe that we have to hold accountable these people that are trying to impose their opinions or the ideals or agendas into the public. We as journalists have to show the information that we have on hand, like Hugo and Werner said, in full transparency, to try to instigate or to influence to the public on what we have in our agenda, if that is the case, or any agenda for any politician. That doesn't make you an honest and truthful journalist. It has influenced a lot. I believe that it's still going on. And now we've seen in this past week that Facebook is now being being held accountable for a lot of the misinformation that is going around, and how they've been also playing with influencing in politics. But I also believe that this is not only applicable to social media. We have a bigger way that we've been receiving this misinformation. So we can not only hold accountable Facebook for what has been happening. So yes, I think we can make a real change as long as we are neutral in the information, transparent, and thinking about the audiences, the readers, the viewers, for their best interests.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that? Do journalists have a role to play in helping the public become more critical consumers of the news?
I would also add that while I was covering vaccine hesitancy among the Latino community, misinformation had a lot to do with that hesitancy, but also lived experiences. And I think that when I delved into this topic, being able to talk to experts who look like the Latino community and who are data driven and who have the relevant information, it causes a shift. It causes a shift on the public opinion. And, to quote the great Ida B. Wells, who's an investigative journalist, right? She says the people must know before they act, and there's no educator to compare with the press. And I think that is the role of the press, for us to consistently be able to push out stories that not only are about the Latino community, but also to help shift the public opinion, and to be able to say, look, this is the data, this is the narrative, and this is how we should be moving conversations forward. Yeah. And also, I think to that point, language is also very, very important in that process as well.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So I'm a bilingual journalist, and I think that's something that being able to speak to our community in language that is accessible is something that is very important in the way that we produce our stories.
Very interesting. Yes. So we're over an hour into this now. I'm wondering if we could quickly, what would you highlight as some of the as one or two of the most seriously underreported stories when it comes to the Latino community that you think the media should be focusing on now that we're sort of not seeing enough of? Hugo, do you want to take that one to start?
Sure. I think we definitely redistricting, right? We just got out of getting the census report. Werner certainly walked through some of those highlights, but now what's happening right now in the state of Connecticut and throughout the country, behind and mostly a behind the doors process that happens every 10 years. It's the remapping of districts. Now that is so crucial for not only equal representation, but the resources that marginalized communities like Hispanic Latinos are in need of. So a lot of the work that we're going to be doing at the Latino News Network, certainly with ctlatinonews.com, is working on stories about the process of remapping, redistricting, about policy issues, because a lot of the focus around civic engagement happens around elections, whether they be midterm elections, general elections, but not often the hard work of working on policy. And so our partners in Connecticut, beginning with AARP, we work hand in hand with them in order to provide information that educates, not only informs, but educates and certainly empowers the electorate.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to chime in on that question? Where do you think we need more coverage and prioritize the coverage?
Scott, Hugo, I think really highlighted what I would have discussed, which was the redistricting. But given the conversation tonight, in terms of how important it's to show the faces of the people that are part of our community, that make sort of our community even stronger and richer. And if the conversation is about journalism, I would love to see more journalists or conversations like this that highlight more of our journalists, people that have made a big impact in our community. So I'm thinking of people like Ana Alfaro, Felix Viera, Kathy Montano, Norma Rodriguez Reyes, and a number, Margarita Cortavarria, a number, Diana Alverio, and so many others. I think sharing these conversations with journalists and sharing the stories that this journalist actually brought to our community and how they have elevated our story, our face in this growing community, I think would be something that I would love to see.
Great, thank you. And so we're kind of winding down here. I'm wondering if if you could all maybe starting with Maricarmen, if you could if you had one thing you wanted to say tonight that you haven't had a chance to yet, go ahead, please.
So as Hispanic journalists, we have become resilient to many situations that we faced while doing our jobs. This have made us stronger, and personally, it has made me prove to myself that I can do things that I couldn't even imagine in the past. But it's just one step at a time to reach different goals and different perspectives through this. Through my life. So for anyone, if I ever serve of inspiration, I want you to know that you can do whatever you feel like you can do for a positive impact in your life and anyone else's around you. So just keep moving forward.
Thank you very much. That's a nice positive note to go out on. How about you, Brenda?
I think, yeah, it's been both exciting and exhausting, as I always say, to enter this new role and be able to have the opportunity to be in a newsroom where we can talk about these things and also be able to come up with creative solutions. And I think that those conversations shouldn't just be limited to our newsrooms, but also, spaces like this, so that we can also be in the works of what other people are creating and what other people are covering, so that the Latino community is served justice when we are doing our coverage on a day-to-day basis. So I look forward to building that here in Connecticut as well.
Wonderful. And how long have you been here now, Brenda? Can you
I've
tell
only
us?
been here for a year.
Okay.
Yes.
And Report for America, is it a 2-year
It's a
stint, or is it open-ended?
It's what we start off with a 1 year. So I'm currently just starting my second year with Report for America and Connecticut Public Radio. Yes.
We love having you here.
Thank
And
you.
Hugo, would you like to share a few closing thoughts?
Certainly. I think, and it's self-serving, but I think it's very important to support independent local media. I think that some of our guests are certainly examples of that. I think independent media are filling news deserts, gaps that legacy media no longer can afford because of contracting budgets. CTLatinonews.com, like so many others in the state of Connecticut, are free to read, free to listen, free to watch, but not free to produce. So please support local media. Please support independent media by following us on our social media handles, by certainly reading, watching, listening to the content that we're producing, and absolutely provide your feedback. And of course, by making a donation. I think that the future of journalism is strong, and it's built on a foundation of collaboration, largely due to independent media.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to add that too, because I'm also officially now I formalized Boceto Media. So I am so happy for that. After so many struggles I've been through a lot of good times professionally this year, but also really hard moments in my family, my personal life. So now I'm trying kind of reinventing myself, retaking my business, and this time as a formalized company, and trying to do the best for the best interest of the community that I love here in Connecticut, and also to grow as a entrepreneur and as a publisher. So yes, please support us.
And Scott, my final comments would be, I think you're muted, Scott.
Hello? Hello? Oh.
Yes, we can hear you now.
No, you can hear me now. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. My apologies. Yes. Okay. Before we get to you, Werner, I just wanted to ask Maricarmen if she could tell us, what is Boceto Media? What should we be expecting to see there or hear there?
So pretty much the same stuff that I've been covering, which is community-based journalism, stories of local politics, highlighting anyone that really makes a positive impact in Connecticut. Again, I dedicate my journalism skills to the Hispanic community, but in reality, anyone that wants to be included and wants to add their own share to integrate with us is always welcome. So hopefully we can grow, and we can also work with different agencies to move forward, like I said, to grow together as Hispanics, so that we can also support each other and our communities as well.
My very best wishes with that project. We'll be watching closely and looking forward to your news product. And Werner, could you please, sorry to have.
Yeah, no, this is, I am very grateful to be a part of this circle. We want to have our Latino media be independent as much as possible. I, of course, work for the state government, and I am always looking for funds both at the federal level and the state level, so that we can create these public information campaigns, paid public information campaigns, where we can use all our local media to solve problems in our community. So I had, I received in years past $250,000 for a tobacco cessation program, or $100,000 for a lead poisoning prevention program, and a number of other grants that I like to always use with Latino media, so that we can inform our community and keep ourselves informed of programs that serve our community. So I will continue doing everything that I can support local media in the state of Connecticut.
Yes. I'm sorry. I think we've kind of reached the end of our time here tonight. Unless somebody has something urgent they'd like to share, I'd like to thank you all for joining tonight for a very interesting and lively conversation. Many important points and good points, and I'm sure that a lot of people out there who've been watching have taken a lot away from this tonight. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Scott, for a super great moderation. This was a wonderful discussion, a very self-aware discussion, and I'm sure we should all keep a very close eye in Latino news media and Latino journalism in Connecticut in the coming years, for sure. But before we sign off, I know we're going a little bit over time, but I just want to highlight a couple of future programs here at Connecticut's Old State House. We have a cake decorating contest going on right now. So if you're into baking, we have a election day cake contest going on. So if you'd like to decorate a cake and submit your creations to our email, just check out our Facebook page, and the deadline is on October 25th. And also the Hartford History Lecture Series in partnership with Capital Community College is going to start on October 21st, and the second lecture is on the 28th, then on November 4th and on the 18th. All of them are at 3 p.m. So hope to see you in those upcoming projects. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today, and thank you again to our speakers and to Scott and to El Instituto. But thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you. Good night.